She told me she shouldn't do this, her voice shaking, her eyes saying the opposite. And when she did, once, twice, again and again, I realized some connections aren't mistakes. They're moments you can't undo. Started on an overcast afternoon, the kind of day that smells like rain and quiet endings. The sky hung low over the lake, a soft gray reflection trembling in the water. I had been assigned to help set up for a small art lecture at the community center, projectors, chairs, lighting. Nothing special. But when she walked in, the air shifted, as if the whole room had suddenly remembered how to breathe. She carried herself with a calm assurance, not arrogance, but the kind of confidence that comes from having lived enough to stop pretending. A beige coat draped over her shoulders, hair swept into a loose twist that revealed a few silver strands catching the light. I noticed how she moved, deliberate, graceful, every step unhurried, as if she refused to let the world rush her. "Hi," she said with a polite smile, her voice low and clear. "You must be the technician they mentioned?" I nodded, fumbling a little with the cables in my hands. "Yeah, I'm just making sure everything's running before the talk starts." She walked closer, leaning slightly to look at the screen. The faint scent of jasmine and rainwater drifted toward me, and I swear, for a moment, I forgot what I was supposed to be doing. There was something about her presence, the quiet composure, the warmth behind her eyes, that felt disarming. As we tested the sound, she began to hum under her breath. A melody I didn't recognize but somehow knew I'd remember. "This place reminds me of somewhere," she said, glancing toward the windows fogged with rain. "I can't decide if it feels comforting or sad." Her words lingered, comforting or sad. I didn't answer right away, maybe because I felt the same. The air between us wasn't awkward, just heavy with an odd sense of recognition. Like we'd met in another life, another season. When the lecture began, I stood at the back of the room. I wasn't supposed to listen, but her voice drew me in, calm, expressive, every word chosen with care. She spoke about art as memory, about how the things we create are often just ways to hold on to moments we've already lost. I found myself studying her expressions, how her lips curved when she emphasized a thought, how her eyes softened when she spoke of love and regret. After the session ended, most people left quickly, eager to escape the rain. She stayed behind, packing her notes in quiet concentration. When I approached to collect the mic, she looked up with that same half-smile. "You stayed the whole time," she said. "I liked what you said," I replied, "about art and memory." She paused, eyes searching mine for a second longer than necessary. "Careful," she murmured softly, almost teasing. "That kind of thinking gets dangerous." I laughed, unsure how to respond, and she smiled faintly before glancing at the window again. "I shouldn't get too comfortable here," she said, mostly to herself. Then she turned and walked out, leaving only the faint trace of her perfume and those words echoing quietly in my chest. That was the first time I realized, some meetings don't feel like beginnings. They feel like returns. 2 evenings later, I found myself back at the art center, long after most people had gone home. The rain had returned, steady and rhythmic, tapping gently on the glass walls like an old song. I was there to fix a loose connection in the projector system. It should have been a quick job, but I took my time, maybe because part of me hoped she'd be there. And she was. She sat at the far end of the hall, surrounded by open folders and half-empty cups of coffee. Her reading glasses perched delicately on her nose, and her hair fell in loose waves this time, no longer pinned. I almost didn't want to disturb her, but she looked up before I could turn away. "You again," she said, smiling softly. "Either that projector's cursed or you just like working late." I smiled back. "Maybe both." She laughed quietly, the kind of laugh that warms a cold room without trying. It wasn't loud, but it stayed with you. I went about fixing the projector, but we kept talking. She asked about my work, my studies, and I found myself answering with more honesty than usual. There was something in her tone that made me feel safe, like she wasn't just listening to reply, but listening to understand. When I finished, I hesitated. The storm outside had gotten worse. "Would you like some coffee?" I asked. There's a machine downstairs. She hesitated too, tapping her pen against her notebook. Just 1 cup, she said at last. But you're making it sound like you're offering something more dangerous than caffeine. I didn't argue, maybe because she was right. We sat across from each other in the empty lounge. The lights dimmed, the hum of rain filling the silence between us. The air smelled of paper, brewed coffee, and her perfume. That same faint jasmine I'd noticed before. She held her cup with both hands, watching the steam rise. "Do you always stay late?" I asked. "Sometimes," she said softly. "It's easier to think when no one's around. The quiet feels honest." I nodded. Yeah, like the world finally stops asking for something. She looked up, meeting my gaze. Exactly. For a few seconds, neither of us looked away. Her eyes were deep and calm, but there was something behind them. A flicker of loneliness she didn't hide fast enough. Felt like she'd just shown me a secret without meaning to. Then she glanced down at her cup and smiled faintly. "You're too young to be this kind," she said, her tone half playful, half serious. "I don't think kindness has an age," I replied. She didn't answer. Instead, she reached out for the napkin between us, and our fingers brushed. Just a small touch, a quiet, electric second that neither of us expected. She froze. I saw her lips part slightly as if to say something, but no words came. The moment stretched, delicate as glass, before she pulled her hand back slowly. The rain outside grew louder, and the clock ticked in the silence that followed. "I should go," she said finally, standing and gathering her notes. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled just enough for me to notice. As she turned to leave, I wanted to stop her. Not to say anything, just to keep her there a little longer. But all I managed was a quiet, "Good night." She paused by the door, her back to me, and said, "Good night, and thank you." Then, softer, almost to herself, "I shouldn't get used to this." And before I could ask what she meant, she was gone, her reflection fading from the glass as the rain carried her away. That night, I learned something I didn't have words for yet. Some people make the silence feel full. Over the next few weeks, she and I seemed to find each other in the quiet corners of the art center. Never planned, never arranged, just timing that always felt too perfect to be coincidence. Sometimes I'd arrive early to check the equipment, and she'd already be there, reading by the window with her glasses perched on her nose, a half-finished cup of coffee cooling beside her. Each time we met, it was always the same beginning. A polite hello, a small smile, a brief excuse for why we both happened to be there. And yet, every time we stayed longer than we should have. She started leaving me little things. A folded note slipped under a clipboard. A scarf she said she didn't need because the evening had turned warm. A book of poetry I might like. They weren't gifts. Really more like small traces of her presence that she couldn't quite take back. I'd find her handwriting in the margins of the book. Short thoughts, questions, quiet heartbreaks written between the lines. One afternoon, we sat at a table in the small lounge, sorting through event materials. The sun poured through the windows in long gold ribbons, painting her skin with a soft glow. She looked younger in that light, not because of her face, but because of how her eyes softened when she smiled. "I think you enjoy this work more than you admit," she said, arranging papers. "Maybe," I replied, "but I think it's because of the company lately." She looked up at me, half amused, half warning. "Careful," she said, tapping her pen against the table. "Flattery can be dangerous." I leaned back, smiling. "So I've been told." For a moment, the air between us shifted. That unspoken charge that always found its way back no matter how much we both pretended it wasn't there. She reached for a folder at the same time I did. Our hands met halfway. Just a touch, brief, accidental, but it felt different this time. Her fingers stayed where they were, warm against mine. Neither of us moved. I could hear her breath catch, see the way her eyes lowered, as though she was trying to convince herself to let go. When she finally did, she whispered, "We shouldn't," but her voice didn't sound certain. After that, we both tried to draw lines. We told ourselves it was just friendship, just professional courtesy. We even used humor as armor, small jokes to cover the growing pull between us. But the truth was, every conversation lingered too long. Every shared silence said too much. Once, as I walked her to her car, the evening breeze lifted her hair across her face. I reached to tuck it behind her ear without thinking. She froze, not in fear, but in hesitation, and whispered, "Don't." I pulled my hand back. "Sorry." She shook her head, eyes soft. "No, don't be." We stood there in the fading light, saying nothing more. The air smelled faintly of rain and her perfume. The distance between us, just a few inches, felt heavier than anything I'd ever carried. She turned away first, opening her car door. "Good night," she said quietly. And as she drove off, the words she left behind weren't what she said, but what she didn't. We shouldn't, but I don't know how not to. That was the night I understood. Boundaries only work when both hearts agree to honor them. Ours never did. The storm that night came without warning. The kind of rain that feels personal, as if the sky has decided to empty itself over you alone. It was late. The art center had emptied hours ago. I stayed behind to finish packing equipment for the next morning's exhibit. When the thunder rolled in, the lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely. I reached for my phone's flashlight, muttering under my breath. That's when I heard footsteps, soft, hurried, echoing down the corridor. Then her voice, low and calm but touched with unease. "You're still here." Even in the dim light, I could see her. Damp hair from the rain, her blouse clinging slightly to her shoulders, her expression caught between relief and surprise. She'd come back to retrieve a folder she'd left behind. She explained, but the storm had trapped her too. "It looks bad out there," I said, peering through the tall windows. The world outside was nothing but water and lightning. She sighed, rubbing her arms for warmth. "I guess we're not leaving anytime soon." I found a few emergency candles in a storage drawer and lit them. Their glow softened the room, turned every shadow into something intimate. The rain outside grew louder, not angry, just relentless. A rhythm that filled the silence between us. We sat near the small stage, surrounded by stacks of papers and the faint scent of melted wax. She took off her heels and tucked her feet beneath her chair. "You'd think after all these years, I'd stop being afraid of thunder," she said with a nervous laugh. "I don't think it's fear," I replied. "It's remembering that we can't control everything." She looked at me then, really looked, her eyes glimmering in the candlelight. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. It was the kind of silence that feels like standing at the edge of something irreversible. She reached for her mug, fingers brushing mine as she did. A small spark ran through me. Not just attraction, but recognition. That feeling of I've been waiting for this moment without knowing it. She noticed too. Her breath caught, and her voice softened into a whisper. "I shouldn't do this." But she didn't move away. Instead, she stayed. Her hands still close, her eyes searching mine for something I couldn't name. The candle flame flickered between us, the shadows dancing across her face. Slowly, she leaned closer, her forehead nearly touching mine. "I don't know what this is," I murmured. "Neither do I," she whispered. "But it's real." When she finally rested her head against my shoulder, it wasn't dramatic or rushed. Felt inevitable. Her fingers found my sleeve, holding just enough to steady herself. I could feel her heartbeat, steady, human, scared, against my arm. Outside, the rain softened, the storm losing its fury. Inside, time stopped mattering. We didn't speak after that. There was nothing left to explain. When morning came, the light through the windows was pale and forgiving. She stirred first, straightening her clothes, her expression unreadable. "This can't happen again," she said, her voice low, almost pleading. I nodded, though every part of me knew we'd already crossed the line that words couldn't erase. She gave me one last look before walking toward the door, a look that said everything she couldn't bring herself to say aloud. And in that quiet aftermath, surrounded by the faint smell of wax and rain, I finally understood what her words meant. I shouldn't do this wasn't a warning. It was a confession. Morning came with that washed-out stillness that only follows a long night of rain. The world outside was rinsed clean. Streets glistening, trees dripping, the air smelling faintly of wet earth and something fragile. But inside the art center, the air was heavier, almost sacred, as if it remembered everything we'd done to break the silence. She was already awake when I opened my eyes. Sitting by the window, her back to me, her hair falling loosely over her shoulder. She looked out at the clearing sky, one hand wrapped around a cup of coffee that had probably gone cold. "Did you sleep at all?" I asked quietly. She didn't turn. "A little," she said. Then, after a pause, "I shouldn't have stayed." The words hit softly but left a mark all the same. She turned toward me, eyes rimmed with sleeplessness but still steady, still beautiful in that effortless human way. "What happened last night? That can't happen again." I nodded, even though I didn't believe it. "I know." But neither of us moved. There was something in the air between us that neither apology nor logic could wash away. She stood, gathering her things, the small movements deliberate, the kind you make when you're trying not to tremble. "You'll forget about this," she said, almost convincing herself. "I don't think I will," I replied. She looked at me for a long time, the kind of look that strips you bare. Not romantic, not pleading, just true. Then she smiled, faint and sad. "You're young," she whispered. "You'll learn to forget the things you shouldn't remember." She left not long after, her footsteps echoing down the hallway until all I could hear was the sound of dripping water from the eaves. When the door closed behind her, it felt like the room exhaled, but I couldn't. That day, everything she touched reminded me of her. The scarf she'd left on a chair, the faint scent of jasmine in the air. Even the flickering candle stubs felt like they were keeping vigil for something lost. For days we kept our distance. At least we tried. We spoke only when necessary, all professionalism and polite restraint. But her voice still found its way under my skin. The way she said my name carried a warmth that didn't belong in formality. One evening, I caught her in the corridor, standing alone, reading her phone under the dim light. She looked tired, the kind of tired that isn't about sleep, but about feeling too much. When she saw me, she smiled faintly. "You shouldn't look at me like that," she said. "Like what?" "Like you're still there, when I'm trying so hard to leave." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was charged, heavy with all the things we wouldn't admit. I wanted to reach out, to touch her hand, to remind her that what happened wasn't a mistake. It was a moment of truth. But I didn't. Not yet. She stepped closer, just enough that I could feel her warmth, smell the rain still clinging to her coat. Her fingers brushed my sleeve, light, uncertain, and then she whispered, "I said I shouldn't do this." Her voice faltered. "But I don't know how to stop." That night I didn't sleep. I replayed every second. The way she said my name, the look in her eyes that begged for distance but kept finding its way back to me. Guilt has a strange way of turning into gravity. And no matter how much we tried to stay apart, something deeper kept pulling us closer. A quiet truth neither of us was ready to face. It wasn't love yet, not fully. It was something wilder, rawer, the beginning of surrender disguised as regret. The weeks that followed were an exercise in restraint. Two people pretending the world hadn't already changed. We still saw each other almost daily at the art center, surrounded by noise, light, and other people's voices. But beneath the hum of normalcy, there was a quiet undercurrent between us. Something fragile and persistent, like a pulse you could feel but not name. She spoke to me with careful distance now. Her laughter, once warm and easy, had become measured. Her eyes, which used to meet mine without hesitation, now lingered for only a second too long before turning away. But in that second, everything was still there. The pull, the history, the memory of a storm we both pretended to forget. One late afternoon, after a long day of event preparations, I found her standing alone in the exhibit room. The golden light of sunset filtered through the high windows, painting her in soft orange tones. She looked almost unreal, distant and beautiful, like a memory I hadn't earned. "You've been avoiding me," I said quietly. She didn't answer at first. Maybe I'm protecting us. I stepped closer, stopping just short of her shadow. Does it feel like protection? Her shoulders stiffened. No, she admitted, almost in a whisper. It feels like losing something I don't have the right to keep. She finally turned to face me. The emotion in her eyes hit harder than any confession. She looked exhausted from pretending, tired of the distance, the silence, the rules we both kept breaking in our hearts. I told myself it was just a moment, she said. A weakness, something I could bury. Her voice trembled. But then you look at me like that, and everything I buried starts breathing again. I wanted to say something, anything that could ease her guilt, but words felt useless. So instead, I took a step closer. Just one. She didn't move away this time. Her breath hitched, and I could feel the faint tremor in her hands. You're making this harder, she whispered. I think it's already hard, I said softly. We're just pretending it isn't. For a moment, neither of us breathed. The air between us felt like glass, fragile and glowing. Then, slowly, she reached up, her fingertips brushing my cheek. A hesitant touch, trembling with everything she was afraid to say. Her hand lingered there, her thumb tracing a faint line along my jaw. You make me feel young, she said quietly. And that scares me. I caught her hand gently, holding it against my face. Maybe it's not about age, I whispered. Maybe it's about finding someone who reminds you you're still alive. Her eyes closed at that, a single tear escaping down her cheek. And before I could think, she leaned forward. Not into a kiss, but into a closeness that was somehow more intimate. Her forehead rested against mine, and for a heartbeat we simply existed. Two people caught between what was right and what felt real. When she finally stepped back, her voice was barely a breath. We can't keep doing this. I know, but neither of us moved. We stood there in the fading light, knowing full well that this was the point of no return, the moment where decisions stopped belonging to reason. She turned away first, her silhouette outlined by the dying sun. Whatever happens next, she said, don't hate me for choosing what I have to. I wanted to ask what she meant, but the words caught in my throat, because deep down, I already knew love wasn't going to be enough to make this easy. The day she left was quiet, painfully quiet, the kind that feels rehearsed by the universe. There was no storm this time, no thunder or lightning to hide behind, just stillness, sunlight slipping gently through the blinds, and the low hum of a world that refused to pause for two people who suddenly needed more time. She stood by the office window watching the courtyard below. Her suitcase rested near her feet, small, neat, like someone trying not to leave too many traces behind. I knew this moment would come. Maybe she did too. We had both seen it approaching, like a slow tide we couldn't swim against. They're transferring me, she said softly. A new project out of town. It's what I asked for. I nodded because I didn't trust my voice. This is for the best, she continued, her words carefully arranged, like she was reading them from a script written to protect us both. We can't keep pretending there isn't a line we've crossed. And I can't keep standing here waiting for the next time we do. I wanted to tell her that I understood, that I knew every reason, every rule. But all that came out was the truth, the one thing neither of us had dared to say. I'll miss you. She closed her eyes, her shoulders trembling just slightly. Don't, she whispered. Don't make this harder. But her voice broke on the last word. I walked closer, slow, careful, like approaching something sacred that could shatter with a single wrong move. When I reached her, she didn't pull away. Her arms hung loosely at her sides, her breath shallow. I wanted to memorize everything. The warmth of her, the faint scent of jasmine, the way the sunlight caught the gold strands in her hair. I don't regret it, I said quietly. Any of it. She opened her eyes and looked up at me, and in that gaze was everything she tried not to feel. I don't either, she said, her voice trembling. But that's why I have to go. Her hand found mine, not in passion, not in possession, but in farewell. Her fingers traced slow, trembling patterns against my skin, as if trying to leave behind a memory that would outlast her absence. I told myself I shouldn't do this, she whispered almost to herself. But maybe some mistakes are meant to be remembered. And then she stepped closer, resting her forehead lightly against my chest. For one long, still moment, I felt her heartbeat against mine. Steady, real, human. I closed my eyes, wishing time would stop long enough for me to tell her everything I'd never said. But she was already pulling away. I'll be fine, she said softly. You will too. Just don't forget that we were here. And then she was gone. The door closed with a sound too soft for what it meant. The scent of her perfume lingered, then faded. Outside, the afternoon light deepened into gold, stretching shadows across the floor. The same floor where we had stood too close, too often, for too long. I stayed there for a while, staring at the empty space she left behind. There was no drama in the end. No begging, no promises. Just two people who had loved each other quietly and had to let go just as quietly. Sometimes, love doesn't end in fire or destruction. Sometimes, it ends in the soft click of a door and the echo of a voice that once said, I shouldn't do this, and did, again and again. And maybe that's enough to know that, for a while, what we had was real. She said she shouldn't do this. But she did, again and again. And maybe that's what love really is. Not perfect timing, not forever promises. Just two hearts brave enough to feel, even when they shouldn't. Speech balloon, if this story touched you. Let me know in the comments. Tell me what part stayed with you. Red heart, subscribe for more slow burn, emotional stories like this one. And don't forget to hit the bell, so you never miss a moment that feels this real. Headphone, because sometimes the quietest stories are the ones that echo the loudest.